Right, the move by the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission to fully implement the multi-year tariff order, otherwise known as MITO, designed in 2015, and the minimum remittance order for the year 2019 has raised some concerns amongst electricity consumers. Publication making the round shows a minor review of the tariff order indicating that from 2020, consumers would pay a maximum 14 naira addition for every kilowatt hour of energy. However, NERC had said there is no tariff increase approved. Well, let's get a true picture of what the new development is in the electricity sector from one of the directors at the Eco Discos, Mr. George Itomi, as we also look at the new roadmap for electricity in Nigeria. Good morning, Mr. Itomi. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Chimeze.
So what is this argument about?
Today?
What is this argument about electricity tariff increase? What is NERC trying to do with the MITO?
Well, just to put it very clearly, there is no tariff increase. What NRC has done is simply to implement the MITO that had been looked into since 2015 but not implemented. And what the effect has been is that the discos, the shortfalls that had built up over the years in the books of the discos have now been removed, essentially making the discos more bankable. So many of them have found their investments moving from the minus territory to the positive territory. Any review will be considered in accordance with the MITO from next year. So let's make it absolutely clear to consumers that there is no increase in their tariffs, not at this stage.
Now, a lot of people have argued that it's improper to raise electricity tariff when the light is not even anywhere to be seen. The issue of metering hasn't been resolved. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, those concerns are valid, but we also need to look at the agreements that have been signed. As we've said consistently, it's a chicken and egg situation. But I'm hoping that between now and when there would be another tariff review, even if it means an upward review, that so much would have been done to restore consumer confidence in the electricity industry. I know many discos under the new meter asset provider regime are moving at fever pitch pace to ensure that consumers are properly metered. And then there is the new electricity roadmap, which will look at the transmission and distribution ends to strengthen both. Now, I believe that in a period of 6 months, 6 to 9 months, we would have begun to see such results as would engender confidence in consumers, so that if a tariff increase comes afterwards, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. They should be able to deal with it.
Now, this roadmap you just talked about, of course, comes in 3 stages. I remember the federal government had signed a deal that was sometime in July with Siemens. Now, what is Siemens expected to do when it comes to this roadmap? And talking about those 3 stages, what do each of these stages entail?
Now, the roadmap works like this. It's been agreed that the installed generating capacity of electricity is around about 13,000 megawatts. What can be generated today is around about 7,000 megawatts. But what can be evacuated conveniently is below 5,000 megawatts. And the reason cited are transmission difficulties as well as constraints at the distribution end. So phase 1, which ends in 2021, is designed to strengthen transmission network and then to beef up the distribution network as it currently exists. Today, the ability to receive power by the discos is around about 6,000 megawatts. But that's not been attained now because most of the equipment are obsolete and they need to be upgraded. So this is what stage 1 will be dealing with. And we're hoping that in 2021, these two, there would have been some sort of convergence of distribution with transmission. And then if you then move to stage 2, what they then expect is that the balance between 7,000 that would now be evacuated by 2021 and the 13,000 installed will now also be evacuated, by which time you will need additional transmission lines and you will also need additional distribution facilities. But by that time, market confidence would have returned, investment confidence would be a lot higher. It wouldn't be out of place to expect that there will be new players, because you're looking at an entirely new electricity roadmap that will complement the privatization exercise. And really what we need in this industry is confidence. Once there is confidence in the market, then the distribution, the investment that is required will come in. What had plagued us prior to this time was the uncertainty around the privatization exercise, the electricity, the power sector reform program, as was announced when this regime came in. And you recall also for like 2 years we didn't really have NEC commissioners, so there was a little bit of uncertainty around the entire industry. But with what we see today, clarity has been restored, hope has been revived, and I think these are attainable objectives. They are not too ambitious, they are very, very attainable. And then stage 3 would then take us to the point where the federal government will then refocus its interest in the distribution end. And that's when they are looking at increasing the generation end. That's when the government is looking at increasing our generating capacity from the current 13,000 installed capacity to 25,000 megawatts. This will be beyond 2025. Now, as an index of development, if you look at South Africa, that currently generates about 45,000 megawatts, their population is significantly less than ours. So again, it's not too ambitious to aim for 25,000 megawatts, but it will be very respectable to have that. And let's be honest, it's going to be a paradigm shift for economic activities in this country. And I'm not just talking about generation, we're talking about transmission and distribution of stable electricity. The emphasis is on the word stable. So what we have today with the on and off scenarios will completely evaporate from our books. So the ambition is, the expectation is measured, but realistically it can be attained.
Now, from the DISCO's side, how do they intend to work towards achieving this target?
On the distribution end, there's a new MITO order that's coming out that, as you correctly said, will set out new remittance levels and then also impose fresh obligations on metering with them. First, I think what the DISCOs need to do is to implement the meter asset provider initiative, because this would address the fundamental issue of estimated bills with all the annoyance that comes with it. That again can be attained. MAP is designed to have third-party providers of meters help the DISCOs meter their franchise areas, and thereafter, through an agreed methodology, they would recoup their own investments. Many DISCOs are willing to kick off. I think Abuja has kicked off. I believe Ikeja too has kicked off. Eco DISCO should kick off in the next couple of weeks. But what we need is a rapid deployment. So that would be the first thing. Then the second aspect of it would be working under the new roadmap, identifying their equipment that require to be rejuvenated. So we're looking at injection substations, we're looking at their transformers, we're looking at their feeders, and all the other things that would make for robust distribution of power. So we don't have the sort of unreliability cycle that currently plagues the obsolete equipment that we have. These two can be done. What plagued them in the past was the lack of investments in the distribution companies on account of the uncertainties that we've talked about. But with the roadmap, these should disappear, and it should be a whole new ball game. So distribution companies will therefore, in doing all of these things, work to reduce their losses. Remember, what they're targeting is a reduction of their aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses, and reduce those to the barest minimum. But we cannot complete this cycle without mentioning the role of the ministries, departments, and agencies, because there's been this whole difficulty and complaints by the discos that are unable to collect MDA, outstanding MDA debts, and even in some cases even meter them, because some of these MDAs are installations where if you approach some of the disco workers are molested, so to speak. At the meeting with NEC last week, NEC made it absolutely clear that MDAs must be metered, they should be metered, and discos must collect from them. So I guess once we have a workable solution, we can deal with that end, because let's face it, if the MDAs meet up their obligations to the market, it will show a pointer that nobody is immune from these new rules. Nobody's above the rules, and therefore it is it breeds further confidence. This is what we just need now, where everybody is confident that we're all working towards attaining the same goal.
There's something I need a bit of a clarification. I, for one, have noticed that in some areas, they will tell you that they have constant electricity, at least for more than 8 hours. For instance, the area where I live. And of course, in Magodo now, Magodo area, you can see that that area for now, for about 3 weeks now, they have like 24/7 electricity. What has happened there?
Now, what has happened is, in spite of, let's agree to one thing, in spite of all the bashing going on around about the poor state of our electricity infrastructure, there's actually been some improvement. This is even without a lot of the new initiatives talked about under the new roadmap coming into effect. There have been a significant improvement in many areas. But when you refer to Magodo, then you're not looking at again, initiatives being introduced by the regulator to help segment the market. So we are actually having consumer groups that are approaching the discos to say, look, if your problem is tariff, then on a willing buyer, willing seller basis, we're ready to work with you to pay the correct tariffs, provided you give us 24/7 power. What has happened in Magodo was that the residents approached Ikeja Disco for the same thing. They walked through it. It took about developers of 6 months to help put the agreement together. And once it was all firmed up, Ikeja Disco then made the investment, and they totally rewired the entire estate. And then they are now supplying them power on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. And I think that's a model that can be replicated in other areas. In the co-franchise area, for example, I know we're talking to so many consumer groups who say, look, we want something similar. And I think it's the right way to go. Some people think it's discriminatory, but I don't believe it is. The current system by which you subject everybody to low tariffs with all the inefficiencies that go to it do more damage to industrial growth in the long run. So those who can afford, in any case, they pay so much for generation, private generation, for diesel, for any other form of electricity generation. So they might as well save all that money, pay the right tariffs, and get power 24/7, and then say goodbye permanently to the generator noise with all the damage that comes, it brings to the noise pollution, the air pollution, the general harassment. There's so much pollution in the Lagos area due to generations blurring all the time. So market segmentation will work on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. I know the regulators all for it, the discos have caught onto it, and most importantly, consumers think it's also the right way to go.
All right, a quick one, Mr. Toby, before I let you go. If this new roadmap is properly implemented, when do you think Nigerians will now begin to enjoy 24/7 electricity supply? A quick one.
Well, we cannot talk about, if you're talking about Nigeria as a corporate entity 24/7, it's a bit difficult to say by XYZ everybody. But what we can see and we can notice markedly would be an incremental improvement in power supply. And you are going to have oasis of 24/7 power as we go along, because you know, we work on a national grid system, and at times the grid gets disrupted at various points. So in terms of, and that's why the roadmap talks about dealing with the distribution and transmission ends before they then tackle generation, so that on a steady basis you can move everybody slowly towards that 24/7 power. But in the interim, as we can see with the Magodo residents, you can get oases of excellence at different parts of the country.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time, Mr. George Etomi. He's one of the directors at Eco Distribution Company.